I guess we can, yeah, we all made it. The Board of Education acknowledges that we are on the traditional territories of the Comox First Nation. We would like to thank them for the privilege of living on their land and the gift of working with their children. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 5:31. And can I get a motion that the agenda be approved as presented? Christy, seconded by Susan. Great. All in favor? Sorry, I'm a little rushed today. Yeah, welcome everyone, new and old. It looks like D, presentations and delegations. We have an environmental outdoor learning update. Vivian, did you want to introduce everyone that's joining us today?
Oh, thank you, please. So we have Serena Allison with us today, lead teacher for the district for environmental sustainability and numeracy. And we have Sarah Nolan joining us from Airport, classroom teacher. Today we have a treat, but it's going to be quick. So I let them know that they have 15 minutes or less to talk about everything environmental in the district, which is impossible. So what they will share with you are some highlights of things that will be continuing into the next year, and then digging a little bit deeper into the garden-based learning framework, which you have in front of you, the draft for that. I'll let them speak to that. But something I would like to share with you is that I just want to say that I'm very grateful to the work that these two have been doing. Serena has been taking on a lot of work. So what you're going to see today has been work that Sarah and Serena have been doing with other teachers around the garden-based learning framework. A lot of that work was done in collaboration last year when Serena was doing sort of half-time on each of numeracy and outdoor learning. This year, I've asked her to focus a lot more time on numeracy. So she is thinking about ways to continue the sustainability piece moving forward in ways where teachers have the support and guidance, but she won't be able to be that person who's always helping them in the moment. So we have to be thinking about that as a district. And I just wanted you to be aware of that, and we can talk a bit more about that later, but you'll get a sense of why this garden-based framework becomes very critical to us as a district. Anyway, take it away. Thank you.
Okay, hi, I'm Serena. It's so nice to be here and see some familiar faces. And obviously Sarah's with me here for support, so thank you, Sarah. I quickly apologize for my slides because the 10 minutes, so I jammed as much into every slide. So just take a moment to absorb some of the visuals because they speak a lot to the program. So like Vivian said, I'll be highlighting some of the aspects of environmental outdoor learning. And when we think about the scope, it's everywhere from K to 12, from nature education to climate education to risk management to out trips, field trips, and anything and everything in between that kind of is the scope. So one of the big highlights and successes is our district bike and school cycling program that I'd like to highlight. Maybe seen some pictures of that. And so there's two components to it. The school cycling program kind of replaced what we may have known as the iRide program. So now it's this district school cycling program, and that's run through collaboration with the Comox Valley Cycling Coalition. So every student in our district in grade 4 or their grade 5 year gets this experience, a 2-day program that goes over bike handling skills and then road safety. And this year, kind of something new we're piloting as we notice that there's a gap. We have a lot of non-riders and riders with diverse needs. So we're exploring how to best support them as well. And we have some fun stories that I shared with Inclusive Ed and some things that we hopefully can carry forward into the years to come. So that's really exciting. And then the second part to our district cycling program are our district bikes. So any teacher can take the bikes out. It's kind of like I would say a rental or a booking program, and they use it to explore the valley. It's a way of active transportation, getting out. In some of those pictures, you can see them exploring Mackling Park, the Rotary Trail. We've been down to the Fish Weirs, been out down by the dam, and they've been going all over. So yeah, teachers, they're fully booked. So they have them for a week, and sometimes I come in and support them, and sometimes I don't. I'm using my 5 minutes fast, but also it goes beyond that. It's also supported by our trades department, which at Vanier, they do all the repairs on the bikes, which happens when students are using them. And also our STEP program has helped make some of the equipment. So it's full district, and maintenance delivers them everywhere. So I'm so grateful for that. So again, kind of with that outdoor rec kind of perspective, we also have the district snowshoes. And with both these programs, you know, beyond the experience of the students, there's also that capacity piece of for our teachers. So over the years, we've had these snowshoes. We've run like winter Pro D, so taking teachers up there and giving them ideas how to connect to place up in our winter environment. And you can see here in some of the pictures, students from grade 1, 2, all the way to some grade 12 students have been utilizing the snowshoes. And again, that booking, and they take them up anywhere from in our school grounds on those snow days to up at Mount Washington. And, you know, some of those kids, that's the first time they've ever been up in that environment. So it really gives students a chance to explore beyond just the site of our school grounds, but this whole place. So to bring us to the school garden framework, like Vivian said, we had almost a 2-year experience with that, with capacity building and time working together on diving into what are school gardens beyond just growing food. And I think you guys can all imagine that a school garden's not there to produce food for the school. So we really went in with the lens of it as a learning space, that extension outside of our classrooms. And it's also a lens of outdoor learning in general. So our 2 focuses and guiding questions were what garden-based learning approaches, structures, and practices foster environmental stewardship and connection to place. So again, how can this garden help us connect to where we are, right? And what are the areas outside of the garden that help us connect to the garden? So it's pretty movable. Our other guiding question was how can schools develop and sustain garden spaces as an ongoing learning environment? Okay, so open to everybody. And we invited schools to join in, and our lead garden schools and teachers, because some people have moved around a little bit, are the schools listed below there. Sarah being one for airport. And after all this learning together and some really intentional collaboration and growth together, we came up with this framework. So this is our Canva created icon. And, yeah, and I just, I'm going to draw your attention to the intention, and I'll read it out to you. And it's in the center, so it's our driving force. So our school gardens are intentional places for play, learning, growth, and connection. They are shared spaces to engage reciprocally with the land and seasonal rounds, while igniting curiosity, wonder, and gratitude for the natural world, ourselves, and each other. And it took us a few days to like really mull that over. So, and as you can see, all the other supporting parts that support that intention. And yeah, maybe Sarah. Sure. Maybe I just have some pictures here of just some students, and there's a lot going on in these. And Sarah was a teacher, or is a teacher at airport, and she's utilized the garden lot. So maybe just, I don't know, speak to a picture here or some highlights. Or
I think one of the challenges with school gardens is the timing of a garden, but it also tends to be really utilized when there is a person at the school that's very invested in maintaining it. And if that person leaves the school, it very quickly becomes sort of a wasteland. And then it's hard to bring it back from that. And we were in a situation at Airport where there was a really strong leader in EA that completely took on the garden project and left. And it was really in disarray. And with a huge amount of effort from Carly at Lush counseling us, me, we were able to rebuild the garden and rebuild beds and bring it back to a space that could be utilized. But again, then we come to the point of who is taking care of the garden. Because sometimes when it becomes an everybody project, it quickly becomes a nobody project. And then you're in that same situation. So we were really fortunate last year. I kind of casually mentioned to our admin, hey, what would you think about a prep day in the garden for the kids? And she said yes. So last year I spent every Monday outside we have 9 divisions, so about 35 to 40 minutes per class. It was like a full-on day, but we spent outside and in the garden. And the key to that was the learning from Megan Zenny, which we did 4 sessions with her.
I think 6, yeah,
6.
4 to 6, yeah.
And she talked so much about the core routines in a garden. And that has been instrumental in how we're able to manage that space, because it took away, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to plant. What am I going to take the kids out there to do? Because she was able to kind of coach us through what could you do each month and what could you do each season. So it became less scary for somebody who didn't feel entirely comfortable out there to choose a task and take the kids out there. The really great thing is, because we spent so much time in the garden last year, the actual real teachers in the garden are the kids, because now they're saying, hey, we need to go out there and we've got to get peas in. It's like time for peas. So they're the ones that know these routines now. The maple trees have all the maple leaves have all fallen down. We have to gather the leaves. We have to mulch the beds. Like, it's time to do this. So they're the ones that are taking on those routines, even though I'm not in that role this year. With their individual teachers, they're saying, hey, it's time. Let's get out there and do this or do that. So the garden is sustaining itself this year with the help of them. It's called the Green Team. We do 2 or 3 lunchtimes a week. We have a really robust compost program at school, in each classroom, and a really healthy compost in the garden. So yeah, everybody has kind of found a little thing they like to do, whether it's looking for bugs, or we have a bed that's just the digging bed. That's all that happens in there is digging. We found a lot of our intermediate boys in particular are big fans of heavy work. So turning over compost, unloading mulch, raking things, that was their thing. They weren't really interested in planting too much, but those are all jobs that need to be done in there. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. And I ran a similar prep program too in some of our other schools, do it as well. And, anywhere from gardening, but taking art into it, science, numeracy, and literacy books. It's just endless. It's another learning space, right? Kids looking for insects, building. So in the framework, you'll notice there's curricular connections, and there's all the connections to the core competencies as well, like working together in a shared space, and that reciprocation, right, with the land. If we're caring for the land will care back for us. And then, so in the framework, there's all these different lenses you can go into the garden with. Not all of them, right? But you could go in with any one of these lenses. Nature as co-teacher, focusing on the seasonal rounds. Any curriculum, I feel, you can take into the garden. There's also your sustainability, UN sustainability goals, which is kind of bringing it beyond our local perspective to our global perspective. And then also the idea of play and risky play, that heavy lifting and digging is a calming aspect for a lot of our students, but it's also a way for movement that is considered risky. And as we know in our recent reports, how important that is. I could talk forever about this, but I'm not going to talk anymore. But here's some of the stuff, our resources. So we still have access to all of the Megan Zenny videos on Learn 71. There's environmental and outdoor learning webpage, and there's a section there that I've created for garden and food-based literacy, so teachers can refer back to it. We also have starting up mentorships. All those schools that participated, teachers can come in and connect with a mentor with a garden if they want to. And we also have those great connections with our community, such as Lush Valley, and that's an ongoing conversation. They are definitely a partner in this.
Serena has worked really hard. People have been incredibly generous with supplies and plants and soil and compost, and you've worked really hard to get that going. But yeah,
community connections are such a big part. So my last 10 seconds. I don't know how it is. Thank you for your patience. Another highlight beyond the garden framework and all the others is in 2020, we had a youth climate action conference. And I'm not sure if anyone was here to be a part of that or witness to it, but it would, let me remind you, February 2020. Okay. Yeah. So it was unbelievable. And the climate was right also. So that was when the youth climate marches were happening, and it was a big surgence. And we had 400 people there, about 350 students and another 50 supporting community and adults, as well as invitations, some of them from our regional districts. And it was an unbelievable day. It's where I first met Vivian as well. So we feel the time is right to do it again. So there's hope to move forward to bring our youth together from grades 8 to 12, hopefully next year. Qualicum has been running one for the last couple of years, and we're in the early stages of planning on what that could look like. And that connection just to our youth and showing them that we're walking alongside them in this journey, and also the community. So as a school district, but also as community. So we've partnered up with the regional district, and they're supporting us with some planning along with that as well. So I really look forward to your support in that, and to celebrate it with us. I think that's it for now. Coming soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to talk at length about any of this.
Yeah, Chelsea, go ahead.
Hey, I have a question. My question is, I'm looking at page 19, which has a beautiful image of two students in wheelchair. Lots of it at this lovely table raised garden bed. And I'm imagining, of course, in sort of most common gardens I would imagine at least three fairly obvious barriers. One being a lot of them the width between the beds I find can be pretty compact, the terrain and what terrain there is at the bottom. And then also just that I'm imagining, if I may, most schools I've seen haven't had this type of thing. I'm just wondering if you know if majority of our schools do, if that's something that you find works best, or if you have a better way to address that accessibility barrier.
Well, when we look at accessibility, that's a physical accessibility. So I know some of our schools that have children in wheelchairs have implemented and put in, we've had the STEP program put in a raised bed such as that. And I'm at talk at length with Inclusive Education on how to make gardens more accessible. So to answer your question, does every school garden have one? Not yet. But as the need arises, if it's a raised bed like this in particular, I think it's a easy solution in that sense to get that built and put in. And then, like the ground and movement, it depends on where the gardens were. Unfortunately, when the gardens were all put in, that probably wasn't a lens that was considered. So we're working with the environment that's already existing. But I've had lots of great conversations with accessibility teams. So good noticing.
Go ahead, Shannon, and then Christine.
Thanks. That was really, really interesting. I'm curious if there are opportunities like during the school year for like the kind of the leads at the different schools to come together and talk about like the school-based gardens or the nature-based like learning opportunities that there are, rather than just talking within each school. Like if there's kind of a district-wide conversation where people come together and talk about what's going on at their own school.
Are you talking about like the lead teachers for the gardens, like the ones there, or people
Yeah.
kind of in my position?
Yeah, the boots on the ground in the schools, whether I think, you know, whether that's sometimes parents or teachers or a combination of both, or EAs, as you mentioned as well.
Well, with the lead garden schools, I've had a chance to pull those teachers in particular together, not only for collaboration around this project, but a sharing of resources. So kind of like a network. At this point, the opportunity to invite others hasn't, I guess, arose or come up, but their communication process is to bring it back to their school as the lead and share it out and create committees. Obviously, there's some strong parent help with some of the gardens too, so they're often liaisoning with them, and that kind of naturally happens. So to this point, yes, we've had time to come together and collaborate with some release time. Yeah, that's the best part of these kind of projects.
If I can
Some
just
pro
add,
opportunities too. There's been,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
and if I could just add, like, it depends on what our focus is. So because that was a focus for last year, there was lots of release time to do exactly what you're talking about around this initiative. And then Serena meets with other groups too, depending on what's happening. So, yeah.
Christy? Thanks. I just want to say, I absolutely love that this is something that can go out. Everyone can use it. I just love the work done here. Great job, guys. Beautiful. And I love all of the incorporation of Indigenous ways. I have two questions. One of them is if this is ever going to be something where we look at you're incorporating year-round Indigenous harvesting of our own lands, because we have, a lot of our properties have Indigenous, herbs that we can use. But again, we only want to harvest them at certain times and things like that. So that's one of my first questions. So I was wondering that.
Yeah, well, that was a huge thing that came up in our conversations. We had both Chetty and Lynn on this team too. So, this is a garden framework, but it's not just confined to those garden spaces. And when you look into detail, and we had a lot of conversations like that, like what does the garden look like beyond the walls of the garden too? So this is not a prescribed task, right? So is it encouraged that teachers take their students and schools participate in things beyond the garden walls? Absolutely, but not necessarily prescribed. And then I think any time spent outside, those noticing and wonders of what's going on will naturally happen. And if there's yummy berries or things to harvest, I think those people will jump on that opportunity.
Definitely. My second question was wondering about summer. Has there been any consideration of, what other organizations or groups that are in our community that we could look at partnering with for maybe coming in and doing some watering and doing some work, whether they're of different inclusive groups, whether they're, elderly groups or things along those lines? Because to me, I know that that's a struggle with our gardens to try to get parents and students or teachers or EAs or somebody to go in during the summertime. So I'm wondering if what kind of concepts have been thought of for that.
So two parts to that. That would take a massive, or three parts. That's a big coordination piece. So depending on time and focus that our district wants to put on coordinating that, we've come up with a zillion ideas. The two that have been landed on in kind of the most popular have been supported by Megan Zenny too, is teachers that were part of the Lead Garden School and all this Pro-D is to loop in their parent community, right? So they have letters that have been shared and drafted. So quite often if there is a prep position or a teacher that's taking that lead, they send that note out I know this for certain for Puntledge. I'm a Puntledge parent as well. And I got that letter and we signed up for our week and we went down and watered. So yeah, every school site's going to be a little bit different opposed to like a whole district wide. The second part with that is that partnership we've had with Lush Valley. They're run off of grants as well. So they had a grant one year to support some schools and bring in some community members to help with watering and care of the gardens. So I think it was a cross-generational grant. So they had some elders or local community working on it. So is there a solution currently in place district-wide? No, but there are some options to choose from. So yeah.
Thank you.
I think there's, if I can just add, it is very dependent on the school community. Airport is located inside the PMQs of the military community, and they don't generally have garden spaces. So the garden, taking care of the garden is a very popular option over the summer. We did a lot of fundraising with West Coast Seeds, and we're able to buy a water timer. So a few things that are put in place just to sort of ease in case somebody isn't able to come. So they're encouraged to come and hand water and weed and harvest during their week.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions?
Just one quick comment if I could.
Yep.
I'll be quick. Thank you. Serena and Sarah, thank you so much for your presentation. And Serena, I think it was yesterday, was in a meeting with a community member who was talking about your work and how meaningful it was and the work that you're doing. And that's the first time I'd really heard the concept around the work that you're doing, both with waste diversion, green teams, environmental sustainability, gardening, nature-based, is part of climate hope and optimism piece. So as our students get that opportunity to be empowered and engaged and inspired, that also generates some climate hope and not just the climate crisis. So really appreciate that work that you're doing with our youth to give them some hope. So thank you.
Yeah. And I actually did have one just quick kind of question, comment, and you actually mentioned it again in your statement. And it was just, you had mentioned that I think it was at Airport that they have a green team, and I'm aware that a couple other schools that I'm a liaison trustee at have green teams. Are those typically like the schools that have these, like, that have the leads in the gardens, and or do all schools have a green team, and is gardening under that umbrella, or is it just like schools that have decided they're going to have a green team also have this passion amongst like a bunch of other environmental umbrella items? And so it's not something that's required of every school to have a green team.
It's not required. Yeah, it's like a passion project. Yeah.
Okay.
So sometimes they're green teams, sometimes they're gardens, sometimes they're leadership.
Yeah.
So it's different at every school site.
Okay. The green team invited me to, Arden's green team invited me to watch their smoothie bike advocacy. So I'm going down to check out that, and they often have advocacy work going on. And I know Cumberland doesn't necessarily have like a green team, but they do other work sort of through CCSS. So I was just curious whether it was something that like was more common.
Yeah, there's definitely lots of schools that have it, especially and at our secondary, and that ebbs and flows like a lot of things, right? As students age out of programs and teams move around. So yeah, hopefully, with something like this climate conference and district initiatives that support sustainable education, environmental sustainable education, we kind of keep that momentum, right? Encourage those and support those kids.
It's something that's done outside of your regular grade 2-3 teacher job too. So when you have the space to take on lunch hours 3 days a week and that kind of stuff, that I think that's when you'll find more people are engaged in it, because that can be a lot in addition to your regular full-time role.
Yeah.
Prep positions are really.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense to me. Thanks. Yeah, it was so nice having you here. Thanks so much. It was a great presentation. I'm really looking
for sharing
forward to
this.
the Youth Climate Action Conference.
I can talk at length about anything.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
It was great to have the big
Food
picture
will pass
and school.
Yeah.
examples.
Thanks for the hard piece.
If you want to come and peek anytime.
Yeah.
So, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know who gets the
wall clicker.
Who's next?
Thank you.
Can't see it. Are you okay? You see?
No, you're just like. It looks
Yeah,
okay.
you can
move if you like.
Good.
I'll give you a minute.
Oh, is it? Oh.
She's glowing.
Yeah. Our next item is item E, information items. Number 1 is strategic planning. Over to you, Jeremy.
Yeah, I'll be a quick verbal update tonight. There's nothing like being sandwiched between an environmental presentation and the budget. So I'm grateful to just to share an update. We had our third strategic plan writing team day last Wednesday. Our fourth and final strategic plan writing day is the 22nd, next Wednesday. There are a few writing teammates in the room tonight. So, and again, I think for me, this process has just been so full of gratitude towards the people who have come and are working really hard to provide the board with a solid educational plan that will help guide the direction that we take. We actually saw, we've done some data dives, we've done some real work on grouping and theming out feedback from community, and we actually did a little bit of writing even on our third writing day that actually did some work. So I'm excited where we're at. I'm looking forward to next week. Again, just super thankful for the folks that have given up 4 days and full days. Like we're talking, I think that there's a planned half an hour lunch that usually is shorter, and there's no breaks. Like it's a full day, and so just really grateful for that. And looking forward to the June presentation to trustees that will come from some members of the writing team around the work that's been done in that group. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. Number 2 is 2024-25 annual operating budget preliminary report from Carrie. Or
Yeah, on pages 1 through 17 is the budget report that's been prepared within the agenda package. But at this point, we're just going to hand it off to Assistant Secretary Treasurer Nelson, supported by our Director of Finance, Hilton, to do a budget presentation. And then obviously we can field questions.
Thank you, Carrie. So we've prepared a presentation to summarize the lengthy report in your agenda. So we'll try to get through it as quickly as we can, but it's probably going to take more than 15 minutes. We'll do our best. Just before I get started, just want to acknowledge Candace Hilton, our Director of Finance. She's put a lot of work into compiling all this information. There's a lot of data that we pull from many sources to put it together into this final presentable format for you. So just want to thank you, Candace. So before we get started, just to remind everybody, this is just focused on the operating component of the budget. It does not include special purpose funds or capital. So this is just a snapshot of your approved process. I highlighted where we're at today. We've already provided presentations on the overview of the entire process, brought to you a report on the implications of the ministry announcement on our revenues, and then we're here today bringing you back a report with the impacts of the revenues as well as all the cost pressures on the financial plan. So in doing so and compiling this budget, we are setting priorities for delivery of student learning. We're looking at the projection for student enrollment, looking at cost pressures across the organization, and projecting revenues, and coming up with strategies and options to address the net budget position. So enrollment is the main driver for our revenue. So just providing this graphical, you can see for the 2024-25 school year, we're projecting 10,303 FTE students, which is up 182 over this current school year. It's about a 2% increase is what we were projecting, and as well out into the next 2 years following is about a 2% increase. And then we're just providing you this graph so you can see in the last 9 years the enrollment growth that the school district has experienced. It's about a 40% increase in enrollment since 2015. So this slide here is a snapshot of the revenue. So when we take the 10,303 student enrollment, that calculates out to the Ministry of Education and Childcare operating grant of $121 million. This is about a $4.7 million increase over the last amended budget in 23-24. And just wanting to note that the increase really covers the increase in enrollment as well as those committed increases to contracts for teachers and support staff, the 2%. This does not include the COLA, the cost of living, which has been approved at 1%, but the ministry has still not made the formal announcement on how much we are going to receive. So we're anticipating to hear in June how much that will be. And then once we know, we can then incorporate that into the budget. So in addition to the Ministry of Education and Childcare grant, we also incorporate other revenues into our operating budget. So this slide here is really a snapshot of there's an attachment in the report, attachment 2. It's on page 14 of your agenda. And this is the top portion, the revenue component, just outlining some of those other impacts. So here you can see the International Student Program. We're anticipating an increase of $207,000 there. We're expecting interest rates to drop as well as our cash balances. So we are anticipating a reduction of $285,000 in interest revenue, as well as we've incorporated another small reduction, about $18,000 relating to other revenue rentals and leases. And this just provides you with a visual of just how much of our revenues are made up of the Ministry of Education and Childcare grant. So 96% of our revenues come from that grant that we're reliant on. So moving on to the expense component of the budget, what we've tried to do here is on that same summary sheet, that attachment 2 that provides all of the expense cost pressures, the increases, we've tried to break it down so that we could show you how much of that is spent on areas that we're getting additional revenue from in the grant that we can attribute to the costs in the budget. So we've separated them on the next 2 slides. We're calling it funded, but it's really just that increase supporting the increased expenses as well. So the contractual increases, the 2% increases toward teachers and support staff make up about $2.76 million. So that's our existing staff at those increases. And then based on increased enrollment, we also have to increase our staffing levels. So the impact on the budget is $1.7 million for that. There's been an increase to teacher mentorship incorporated into this budget by 0.4 FTE. So I believe it was a 0.1 and now it's up to 0.5. So that equates to $50,000. And then we're increasing Indigenous education by 238. We're seeing an increased grant relating to that. It is targeted funding, so we have to recognize the associated costs for that as well. So here you can see there's around the 4.7 million that we just talked about in our increased revenues relating to the grant. And then here we're summarizing some of those other cost pressures that we're not receiving extra funds for through the ministry grant. And so we've got some of them here. We've got 20% premium increases to employee benefits. So on average, across all the employee groups, we're seeing those impacts. We have no control over those, and we're not receiving extra funding from the ministry. So that's working out to about $775,000 across the organization. Inflation for supplies and services across our operations, we're estimating $425,000 increase to our budget for that. There's been some realignment across in the administration PVP exempt to build capacity across the organization. So that's impacting by about $217,000. And then we also have, there's a need to create a position, a district principal position, to focus on anti-racism, diversity, and equity. And we've incorporated that here, and that is also impacting the budget by $205,000. And just wanted to note that we also have included in these cost pressures, we've included about $267,000 associated with exempt and PVP contractual increases as well. But that is also funding we anticipate receiving from the ministry. We just haven't incorporated it here yet because they haven't given us the amount. So they promised in June we should know. But just wanted to highlight the expense and note that we may receive further funding for that. So in an effort to look at, as we're looking across the expenses, we've identified that we do have an opportunity this year, if we wish, to reduce our transfer to local capital, just specific to modulars, purchase of portables. So we can reduce our transfer to local capital by 1.375 this year only. We are anticipating being able to move out purchase of modulars, and based on our latest review of our capital plan. So this is something we could recommend to do this year, but we would do so knowing that we would have to reinstate that for next year in order to meet our future demands in our reserve. So overall, if we take that into account, there's an overall total cost pressure on the budget this year of $5.2 million. And this just gives you a visual of where the total expenditures are spent, how our funds are spent in the district. So you can see 82% is going towards instruction, 11% towards operations and maintenance, 2% for transportation, and 5% for district administration. So this is just also a visual of where the salaries are, how the portion of our expenses are related to salaries and benefits. So works out to about 86% for salaries and benefits and 14% towards services and supplies. And then here, just highlighting for you where our expenditures for our salaries are going towards different positions. So we have teachers at 59%, with TOCs at 5%, support staff spending 13% there, 10% on our educational assistants, 8% for PVP, and 5% for other professionals. So overall, taking into account the impacts on our revenues and our expenditures, the preliminary budget is in a deficit position of $1,000,000 $4,364. So we can balance the budget utilizing prior year surplus at this point. However, the recommendation is this to do further operational reviews over the course of the year to reduce the reliance on the prior year surplus, as well as the team will be looking at realigning funds in the budget to support the board's newly adopted strategic priorities. And so since we're just speaking about utilizing prior year surplus, just want to focus in on the board's policy around accumulated operating surplus and internally restricted funds. So you have this policy that indicates retaining 1.5% minimum of your operating expenditures for the fiscal year. And so that's important to maintain that minimum balance in order to meet any unforeseen events. It's your working capital to help maintain your operations during challenging times. So it's important to keep that balance healthy. So just highlighting for you, for this current fiscal year we're in, the 2023-24 budget, we have a budgeted surplus of 1.7 million, and that does meet your board policy. You're within policy there. And then I just wanted to highlight for you kind of where we project you would land at the end of the 2024-25 year if you were to rely on prior year surplus to balance your budget. So here you can see we're starting it out at the 1.7 million that was budgeted. We, at the latest last board meeting, you received an update on the Q3 projected surplus for the fiscal year. And at that point, we're anticipating a $1.9 million surplus at the end of this fiscal year. So we're taking that into account when we're looking at where we think we're going to land. So we're acknowledging that that is there and that's still anticipated. We know that at year end, there are some ongoing projects or expenses that need to be carried forward into the next year. So we would have to hold some of that surplus funds so that we make sure it's there to continue those on. So that's up there at $744,000. And in addition to that, if we have that surplus, it's been identified that we need to set $300,000 aside so that we can execute or operationalize any of your new strategic priorities that we need. And then in red, you can see that's where we're utilizing, we're showing the reduction of using that surplus to balance the budget. So the 182,976 that we're adding back is actually a very conservative estimate of what we think we're going to get from the ministry to offset the costs relating to the PPP and excluded increases. So we wanted to make sure we historically do get those funds. It's just timing of announcement, but we wanted to make sure we incorporated something there so that we can come to where we think we're going to land at the end there. So ultimately, based on this budget and where we're at with the Q3, we anticipate a projected 2024-2025 budgeted accumulated surplus of 1.8 million, which would land at 1.5% of the 2023-24 forecasted expenditures. So that would maintain the minimum balance of the board. I just thought I would include this breakdown for you as well, so you could see that 744,000 that we were anticipating holding, just to give you an idea of what makes up that balance. So it's really some targeted funds that the 30,000, those are targeted funds that we need to hold for a specific program. We're anticipating about $361,000 in carry forward projects and PO commitments. 250,000 of it is specifically for Indigenous education. So that would be funds they didn't spend this year. We need to carry forward so that they stay with them. School surplus carry forward of 2,500. And then we've also included $100,000 estimated pending liability. That's really just a conservative to ensure if anything were to come up, that there's additional funds set aside. And then in addition to that was the $300,000 we considered towards strategic priorities as well. So finally, just the next steps of the budget. We do have a opportunity for public feedback posted on our website that's opened up today, and it will be available through May 22nd. So we'll be collecting feedback from the public, and we will share our budget through social media after we've completed our presentations. We have all of the reports and presentations posted on a special webpage on our website. And then we would hope to bring back the feedback to the board on the May 28th meeting. And if there are no further changes to the budget, we would be able to compile it into the template and bylaw at that time. But we certainly have more time. We have till the end of June to finalize the budget. So if there's further changes or discussion that needs to take place, we could push that to the June 25th board meeting. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Any questions?
Can I just start with just a clarification of one component of the preliminary budget piece, which is connected to educational administration and the district principal that is listed there. So just to know, I think finance heard clearly that this would be a priority, but it hasn't been approved. It hasn't been posted. And what we had originally been looking at is whether we could reprioritize pre-existing budgets and have this as a position with zero cost. So it is not yet. That will be your work as part of your budget consultation process that will be coming. Will be you looking at that position. It has not. It's been built in, but it is not yet, so to speak. So that I just want to note. So essentially, it's a position that when we look at what we hear over and over, we heard it in our surveys. I think it will be directly connected to feedback just around the work we need to do about really building and increasing capacity and expectation around anti-racism in our district, and around really doing that work of creating frameworks that create the safe spaces that we expect when our kids are in school. So that's really what that is there. It's there to flag as a priority, whether it is that position specifically or not, or how that looks, we'll need to weigh with other priorities as they emerge through this process. So.
Thanks, Jeremy. Does anyone, you had your hand up. Christy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is there any explanation of why there's a 20% increase for the premiums for the employee benefits package? Because it seems like it's a very large increase on top of all of the inflation costs that are coming down the pipeline. So I'm just wondering if there was an option for looking at other, providers, or if this is where we are, and or any explanation given for that, because that's huge.
It is large. And just so the board is aware too, we're not the only district that is faced with the increases in the extended health and dental premiums. The main reason is usage of the plan. So employee utilization of the services are high. As well, teachers have had some bargained improvements to their plan that have raised the limits on some of the practitioner services, as well as like prescriptions and other limits. So they are bargained, not a lot of control from a district perspective. We did attend a meeting with our BC ASBO zone a few weeks back, and I feel like most finance people at those districts were in the same boat, where benefits, inflation, and replacement costs are really coming unfunded, and they're struggling to find ways to meet the demand from a budget perspective. I know I looked at SD 69's website today. Well, they're not projecting any increase in their enrollment. They've had to find $500,000 in savings, and $470 of that was just due to their benefit plan increases. And they have significantly less staff than we do. So we took a very conservative approach at our estimate. It actually, I would say, is a bit low, just from the simple fact that when you look at our projection for Q3, we're already budgeting to exceed what's in our budget this year. And we've technically increased and shown a pressure relating to what actually the premiums will increase next year. So it's probably also on the low side.
Probably worth adding too that we belong to the BCPC buying group. I'm not sure if that's exactly what it's called. So in terms of looking for other providers, we have buying power by belonging to that. So with that, it's 20%. If we were as a single school district out there doing it, I would expect it to be larger.
I feel like I remember this happening before. So maybe
I feel like post-COVID, there was sort of the lull of where benefits plans weren't being utilized because no one could visit a practitioner, and it's sort of caught up, but then it's just continued on. People requiring more mental health support in other areas have just driven costs even further.
Michelle?
So I have many questions, but I'll start with one at a time. And it's to do with the line, the other revenue line on page 14, where it shows a negative of 28,000. Is this where our international education revenue goes? Or why is this? So where is the international education revenue located? Because this is ministry money, but yet we're seeing expenses from some of our other areas. So I'm trying to figure out where you talked about the report, the presentation talks about international education, but I'm trying to figure out where that revenue is located in the document, or what is the negative 28,000 under other revenue?
So if you're looking at page 14 of the preliminary budget position, there's the revenues sort of divided into two sections, the top being the revenues that are directly tied to any enrollment. So the second row is where you'll see the international program revenue increase, which is really, it's forecasted to be $206,500. And that's directly related to tuition fee increases, as well as some revenues related to, say, exchange programs, summer programs. Below is where you see the other revenue changes, which aren't tied directly to enrollment and not funded by the ministry specifically. So the 28,000 is a combination of a few items. The main item being a physical literacy grant we had received from Pacific Sport the past few years for $43,000. It has been removed. We are not going to be in receipt of that grant this year. And in addition, we've seen some slight increases to our credit card rebate as one of our examples. So we have a large purchasing card program, and Bank of Montreal does pay us a rebate based on usage and the purchases. So we're seeing some increases in our return on that.
Waiting for everybody else. I had one quick question. When you were giving us your presentation, Jennifer, you mentioned something about modulars. You said something about it, and I don't know if I was daydreaming or what, but could you just go back to that spot and just reiterate that for me?
Yeah, so
I didn't understand, or I just maybe just misheard it or something.
Right there. So in there you can see the transfer to local capital reduction of 1.375 million.
Yeah.
And in the report on page
15.
on page 10, at the bottom, you can see that talks a little more detail around the local capital transfer. So last year in the budget, there was a $2.84 million transfer to local capital to hold money for purchase of modulars. And then based on where we feel anticipated capital projects are going to go, we're now looking and we're able to push out some of the purchase of some of the modulars into future years. And so re-looking at that whole transfer, we're able to reduce that transfer to capital down to 1.46 million. So it actually is a 1.3 million reduction this year.
Thank you. That's awesome. Go ahead, Michelle. Oh, I'll see.
Curious around on page 15, the Strong Start and Ready Set Learn additional cost pressure of 5,848. I was only wanting to check and if that, because I knew there was an increase for Strong Starts through Feeding Futures. So this is an additional cost, a separate cost. I'm just curious if there's any explanation as to those, if you know. That's okay, whoever.
I can provide an explanation on that. So that is the incremental increase from this year compared to our amended budget to continue operating that program at its current level of service. Our operating budget actually provides more than that coverage because the targeted grants don't cover the cost of the staffing and the supplies to run those programs. So it's closer to around 70,000 is probably closer to what our operating budget is actually absorbing because that grant is inadequate to cover the cost of providing it.
Thank you.
And we've seen some districts having to reduce their Strong Start offerings to balance budgets.
Okay.
Yeah, when we had that presentation, that was a really good part of that identification. It's interesting.
Thank you.
Michelle?
Yeah, thank you. So Jennifer, you spoke a little bit about the anticipated funding coming for an increase for the, I'm just trying to find the line on here. The wage increase, like not the COLA.
The 261.
Yeah, the 261. And I'm curious why it was added, but not the 1% piece. Like why one increase was factored in, and then why the other increase wasn't factored in.
We were hopeful that the ministry would announce the funding that was attached to COLA and for our excluded positions that are educator positions in March. And so we just received word May 3rd that while they were anticipating doing that, due to the timing of their government approvals, they're now saying late June is when we can anticipate receiving those. And so they actually, basically on the ministry template, they won't allow us to budget for revenue they haven't communicated. And so we basically can't show the expense would only further drive our position into a further budgeted deficit. And so we've made the decision to leave it off, as have most districts. So they've basically said in their communication that they realize it introduces some uncertainty in our planning for next school year, and just basically say it's beyond their control at this point. So I think districts are doing their best to just forecast. We know we're being funded at 2%, and that's basically what we've budgeted for. And they're committing to funding COLA. But it still is an unknown how much funding we will receive for the excluded and PVP.
Thanks, that's great.
Sure. Does that mean that potentially, like, because we've accounted for some of the expense without the revenue, because we don't know what the revenue is, so that million for that, whatever that is, on page 12 would be reduced. It would be a reduced dip into that fund.
That was why on the slide where we showed the contingency balance, we had factored in an estimate of what we hope we will receive to help fund that, and it would help our overall position.
Thanks so much. Does anyone else have any questions at this time? Really appreciate you guys giving us that presentation. It was super detailed and super in-depth, and thanks so much for answering all the questions. You guys have any questions? Cool. So many.
Thank you for
Sorry. Yeah, first. I go first. You go freaking hands up from anyone. I really want you to.
Oh, you really wanted me to?
Yeah. You've got highlighted areas.
Oh,
That's right.
Jeremy answered it with the role of a district principal, and I think when I listened to the presentation by Serena, and we've got Gina Taylor, it was a 3-year position that has been absorbed that's not happening. The role of having those educators on the ground is so essential to support teachers in doing their work in the classes. So the question about if there was a deficit, where would we have the money for the district principal anti-racism, which I also really agree in and believe in. So just knowing that it hasn't necessarily been approved, that was one of my questions, is to where that was coming to. So.
Acknowledging I'm the dumbest person in the room. The push out for purchases of modulars, but we have increased enrollment, feels like not an oxymoron, but like contradictory. So like how are we squaring that circle? I don't understand.
We are hopeful that some applications for capital projects are going to be approved and allow us to increase space.
That was my other.
It still is important to recognize, though, that even though some of those projects may be approved, it doesn't negate the fact that we still have growth happening, and we may have to build that transfer back in. So our intent usually in finance is to smooth that over a number of years. And right now, we just, if we're continuing with the current level of programs and services and what's been proposed, then we can't afford to do that this year.
I think we're always looking for, is this the year for boundary consultations? Is this the year for boundary consultations?
Well, let me plant a seed.
Oh, well. Drop the ball. Of course, Michelle.
Here's my question. So back to page 14 again, under revenue. The prior year surplus appropriation of negative $387,089.
Yes, so basically what I do when I roll over the budget is I remove that from the appropriation. And I've done that to show, if you recall from the amended budget, that the board decided and approved on a budget where you had to actually use $387,000 of a prior year surplus. So when you look at the $1 million for overall, it's really compounded by this 387 from the prior year, plus the net change from our amended till now. And so it's really just a formality on placement of it. Some districts choose to show the years of the surplus appropriation separately, and I've chosen to show it all as one because the overall impact on the current budget is the same. It's still a $1 million for. I don't know if that helps. I think what's confusing for some people too about seeing a deficit position and then we're reporting, projected surpluses is they're really two different things. Like we have a budgeted deficit is what we're currently showing, and budgeted is different than what we're actually experiencing.
And so I guess a good way to think about it is that the budgeted expenses and the money going out is exceeding the budgeted revenues coming in. And this year we're relying on knowing that we're projecting a surplus in our actual results to help us fund that ongoing need into next year. But it still will need to be addressed because eventually we may not have surpluses. We're operating at full capacity in all of our areas.
I didn't mishear you that the recommendation was still at this time, though, to go forward as we align strategic priorities and come back to. Is that correct? Rather than dip from prior year surplus.
What we're proposing in this budget is to rely on your, given the time of year, rely on your prior year surplus. We anticipate you will have enough without falling below your policy level, with the intention that work will take place over the next coming year to address not having to rely so heavily on it for the next budget. And work to realign your budget going forward to align with the new board strategic policy. So that's significant work that would take place over several months to be able to incorporate those changes across the organization.
I need to hear things in a couple languages, so I appreciate it.
Great, Jen, go ahead.
It's on topic, but it could be a little off topic. We've in the past have had a budget committee. So just in the grand scheme of the layout of everything, is this the alternative to the budget committee, or is the budget committee going to be happening again in the fall to reevaluate the 2024-2025 budget?
I was going to say, I think that I'll first say that, yes, right now this would be a forum to provide input, but also the online survey, because the structure has changed with the board, but that's something that could be reviewed. And Candace just was looking at me saying she could provide a historical piece that might be helpful.
To what happened previously. So previously to the committee of the whole process, we had separate board committees.
We sat on it.
Budget committee was an extension of finance committee where partners were invited to these similar type of meetings. I do know that our secretary treasurer of the day last year, it was her intent that with committee of the whole, it's basically the same people in the room and partners would be invited. Similar to how we've done in the past, it's just held in this more public setting rather than a separate meeting, but everyone is still together at the table. We're obviously later this year as we've had some staffing changes, and so it's been challenging for us to pull together the information we require. I can't comment to how the board might want to review or reassess the committee structure. Currently, we're in a committee of the whole and trying to fit into that. But the committee, past budget committees never met in the fall. It was always an annual budget process.
3 or 4.
Yeah.
P's and B's.
And it usually started in January where there was we had more meetings with different items on the agendas. So our intent would be to have more information next year as well. I'm just not sure at this time what that might look like when it comes to meetings.
And if you have any feedback with regards to the process, add that into the feedback that you can provide online.
And I think it's okay to add that we're just, as we move to this new committee of the whole structure, we're sort of identifying some sort of strengths and weaknesses of that structure. And we've been talking about that and what that looks like and how to move forward to best sort of encompass the information for us and for the public. So it is something that we're sort of talking about behind the scenes as well. So. Go ahead, Shannon.
Small question, hopefully it's a small amount of the budget item. Do you know from facilities whether the cost of carbon offsets this year will be increasing or staying about the same as last year? And if increasing, where would that be on the budget?
I haven't seen the final report. I know the report's being worked on, and I assume it's anticipated to come in either the next board meeting or thereafter. Just with verbal discussions with our director of operations, I understood it's reduced. I can't speak to the exact amount, but that's what I was told, so.
I can just add a comment as well, that I know our operations team has worked with a firm as well to look at energy savings, and that is being realized. So from a budget perspective, we've left our utilities essentially the same, except for the addition of new facility and classroom space, knowing that some of our premium rates are increasing, but we're expecting to see some energy savings. So we've just kind of
The blankets we used on our work sessions on Saturday during winter were helpful. So well done.
warm here tonight. So
And it's warm tonight here, yeah.
Go ahead.
So I had two other questions, actually. In the 2024-25, your budgeted expenditures, when it said salaries were 69% and service and supplies were 14 and benefits were 17. Are those numbers that have been typical from the past? Are those ratios the same at that percentage, or is one area caused more of your budget expenditure for this year?
When I was preparing it, I didn't look for a big length of time, but when I was looking back just a few years, it was in line with previous years. Yeah.
And then my other question was on Indigenous Ed. It said increase in per pupil rates for targeted Indigenous funding. Is that a dollar amount that's gone up? Do we know what that amount is?
I can find this.
So on page 13 of your packet. So if you look,
Oh, I see right there. Is that the 1610 per student?
yeah, so the per pupil rate has gone up to $1,770 per pupil versus $1,710 in the previous budget. So this shows you the comparison.
Perfect. Thank you.
Jennifer, and then Shannon.
Just in reference on something on page 10, in the bottom paragraph of the local capital contributions, 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth line down middle, it says refresh of the district's fleet of vehicles. I'm just curious, is there an increase in the fleet, and what are the fleet numbers like now versus what prompts a refresh of that? Like what, I'm just curious if there could be a breakdown of what, like the priority of that and what the metrics are, if you will.
I would say I don't have hard facts on exactly what's being replaced. I know that maintenance has maintained a standard level of fleet service per year. So they're not increasing their fleet. It's really replacing and intended to refresh the vehicles that are aging out.
What's the definition of aging out?
It costs me more to maintain than to replace.
Yeah, so that, just to confirm, when we speak to that, that's an amount that we transfer every year into a reserve, and then is spent to do so. So it's not like it's each year the priority will change based on the needs of the fleet, but we consistently transfer a certain amount to ensure we have funds there, because there's unanticipated needs too.
Shannon, and then Christine.
I found my answer.
Okay.
I was just going to ask, that is also, we're getting some electric vehicles added to our fleet as well this year, or not? That's still in the application process.
I'm actually not sure.
And I think that
for the
there is where we're adding. I don't know the numbers though, so that's exciting to our fleet.
Yeah, so the board added an electric van, I believe, last year or the year before, and that was a specific
transfer identified over and above our regular transfer. It was like a one-time restriction of surplus to fund it.
I think this is my last question. My last question is on unique student needs on page 13. It says adult education, 18.5 FTE. Maybe, I don't know, are we a district that has adult education in it? I didn't think we were, but somebody could enlighten me, maybe I'm wrong.
Their registrations through NIDES.
Oh,
So they could
okay.
be other places, right? Yeah.
Okay, because so it's the same as our teachers, we have teachers in other locals, but they're associated here with us through NIDES, so it's our adult education, so it's registered through NIDES, okay. Well, thank you.
More questions from anyone? Just a comment on your facilities question too. Earlier in the year, Ian gave us a presentation and he highlighted some of the items, and I know he did speak to the vehicles, so I can take a look back and see what month that is, and I can let you know. Does anyone else have any other questions? Good job. That was a lot of great questions. Thanks so much for answering everything and the presentation. And thanks so much for joining us. Great. I think we're done. Can I?
I was like, is that a question?
No, that's a premature motion to adjourn. I apologize.
The motion be adjourned. Chelsea.
Apologies.
Yeah.